Making the leap to clipless pedals can be a scary one, and it's likely to come with a few bumps along the way, but hopefully not bad enough to put you off forever, but I know that does happen. So here are a few beginner skills with clipless pedals to help you out. Clipless pedals, or as most people call them, clips, do have some advantages when it comes to putting the most power into the pedals to get the bike going, but also for riding over rough terrain they can be really good. Don't get me wrong, flat pedals are great as well, and many of the world's best riders and racers still love flat pedals. So do I still ride them quite a lot, but for many intermediate or advanced riders, clipless pedals will be the right choice. But it can be a rough start. Even if you're a really good rider, you can make a few mistakes, and the first few rides can be a bit challenging with clips, even if you're really good. So here's a few tips. Learning how to clip in is a starting point. Of course it is, I hear you saying, but actually picking the right style of pedal for you will determine, or may determine, how you actually clip into those pedals. So first thing is to look at the available pedals on the market and try and find the right one for you and your type of riding. There are different brands and styles of clipless pedals. The most popular are Shimano, they're SPD, they're the originals, and Crank Brothers, super popular as well. There are others like Look, Hope, all variations of the same theme basically. You've got that retention system in the middle, and your cleats on the bottom of the shoe that will actually engage into that retention system. And then you've got different styles of pedals as well. So these are the mallet, Crank Brothers mallet. So they're kind of an enduro style pedal because it's cage around the outside with these grub screws as well. So they look much more like a flat pedal with the extra support around. It's that sort of egg beater in the middle. Crank Brothers do their egg beater pedal, which is just that alone in the middle. So a much lighter weight pedal. You find that those style smaller pedals, even the Shimano ones, just pair much better for cross-country riding. We don't need that extra support and extra sort of friction and grip on the outside for if you're riding sometimes unclipped. The smaller pedals are lighter, of course, and you often pair them with stiffer sole shoes. So like the cross-country shoes often have, the high-end ones have carbon fibre soles, so super stiff. So definitely try and find the one that suits you. If you're an enduro rider, downhill rider, look for ones with a bigger cage. There's pros and cons for each brand. Shimano, some people love them. They have a really sort of direct engagement. You hear a big click when you go in, but I find they have less float. So I come from riding flat pedals for years. I find if I turn too much, I actually move my feet around. I can unclip fairly easily on Shimano pedals, but you can adjust how much retention force is with Shimano. You don't get that option with Crank Brothers, but what I find is these, they feel much more like a flat pedal to me, the way I kind of can get in and out super easily. You can change the amount of degrees by changing your cleats. So I have them on the earliest release, 15 degrees release. So there's things you can play around with, but definitely read up on what pedals and what brand of pedals will suit you and your style of riding the most. One feature I do like of Crank Brothers is you can go in forwards. With Shimano, you have to clip the front of your cleat in and then push down backwards. Same with Crank Brothers, but you can also do it backwards. So if I've unclipped and got my foot off and a foot back on in a random position, you can just sort of shuffle it around and it will clip in eventually. Another really important setup thing is to make sure your cleats on the bottom of your shoes are in the right position, back and forth, so that your foot feels natural on the pedal like it would on a flat pedal. If you have to sort of search around for that cleat, like if it's too far forward, you'll just find it difficult to clip in and out every time, and you don't want to try and get used to it. Basically, especially if you're like me, you're sort of experienced with flat pedals for years, just play around with these to make sure they're in the same position, your foot will be in the same position. And again, because my background's downhill and enduro, I run them really far back in my shoe. On these Shimano shoes, literally as far back as they go, and that puts me in that same position, nice and neutral, slightly heel down. Side to side you can mess around with, just really as much as anything is trying to make sure you've got enough space, you don't clip your foot on the crank for me, so I make sure they're fairly wide. So a larger Q factor, which I don't mind, just feels fine, and I can clip in and out nice and easily. Clipping in is something that I think you'll learn fairly quickly, but it's the clipping out bit which is a stumbling block for many people when they switch over to clipless pedals. And it's something that I definitely made all those mistakes and fell over, and I still do it now, definitely. Occasionally, if I've not ridden them for a while, I put them back on and I'll kind of forget. I'll just go to lift my foot off the pedal, but what you have to do is actually twist your heel out. Like I said before, I've got these on the earliest release, so I don't have to twist too much and they'll come out, but it takes a lot of getting used to. Whilst it's definitely worth sort of leaning against the wall or something and practicing this, I think really you've got to get out, ride some mellow trails to begin with. Yes, you can clip out early to begin with and just get your foot down, but actually that's not very practical because you don't want to be riding trails with your foot unclipped, getting ready to stop. So really it's just a case of repetition. Keep riding, ride the mellow trails. For me, I was racing World Cups, you know, winning British national downhill races, so I was a good enough rider, but when I went to clips, I felt like I went backwards massively, and I'd go and ride something a bit technical, a bit scary, and I would absolutely crap myself because I didn't want to be attached to the bike. So it's definitely a case of just putting in the time and eventually you'll get used to it. Another really easy way of getting some practice in is to stick them on your commuter bike if you ride it to work. Just don't fall off in the middle of town. Once you get used to the feel of riding in clipless pedals, you'll probably notice that sort of feel of extra power, especially climbing. It just feels like you can spin circles a little bit better. It's marginal, but you do get a little bit more of a pull, and that can really help on technical climbs as well. To begin with, you might feel like actually your hamstrings get a bit sore after rides, so they're not used to pulling up as well. But hopefully they'll get better, stronger for it, and you'll be faster for it as well. So step one in getting comfortable with clipless pedals is definitely spending as much time as you can riding mellow trails and just time on the bike, getting used to clipping in, clipping out all the time, making sure you're twisting your heel. And then once you get used to it, you'll then really start to feel a difference when it comes to riding rougher technical terrain. I've had some big crashes over the years, cranking along on terrain that, especially if it's a bit flat and it's rough, you could be pedaling hard on flats, hit a bump that you haven't seen and the foot comes off, and then disaster. So getting used to riding mellow, then starting up in it, and it'll feel so much better on the flat, rough stuff once you're used to it. Also, when it comes to clips, I know I've talked about the extra sort of pedaling power and control you do get on the rougher stuff. I think it can really help. We're moving up the scale here into sort of intermediate and advanced skills, because this trail is definitely advanced, but you just get the extra little bit of wheel placement skills that you can do with flats, which is harder. You've got to be much more precise with flat pedals. With clips, you can cheat a little bit and you can just pull up a little bit and make your back wheel light. When it comes to riding the more technical stuff, where sometimes wheel placement is really, really important, it's just that bit easier on clips, and you can really see that at the highest level. If you watch a bit of World Cup downhill racing, you can see some of the world's best riders are so precise with their front and especially with their back wheel. It's the back wheel that I really find with clips, you can just move it around that much easier. There you go, there's some beginner tips hopefully to help you if you're going to switch over to clipless pedals. Start with getting the right equipment. I would just kind of look at what the pros use style wise. So if you're a cross country rider, look at the type of shoe and pedal they use. Not necessarily brand, but you know what I mean. Size, build, especially with pedals, making sure you get the right size. You know, if you're a super cross country rider, get a super lightweight one. Then practice riding on mellow trails, get used to twisting your heel. It'll take ages, you will fall over, but you'll get there eventually. And then get used to the tech control of lifting that back wheel to move it around to exactly where you want to get it. Have a go, stick with it, you'll get it eventually.